Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I'm here with this topic of ecology, that is ecological factors, and the factor that I will discuss in this presentation is water. As we know that living organisms are influenced by various environmental factors, and these factors are also known as ecological factor or eco-factor. So in this presentation I will try to cover the one factor, that is water. Let's start. Firstly, limiting factors. So all the environmental factors can act as limiting factor. That means they can limit or stop the distribution and growth of living organisms. So it includes various factors which include both biotic and abiotic factors like soil, light, wave action, pollution, space, salinity, then water, temperature, predators, oxygen. So all these factors can be limiting factors. So environmental factors are variable factors, means they can change, that controls a process like growth, distribution of population, organism in an ecosystem. So ये जो environmental factors होते हैं, they are variable, means they can change and they can control the growth and distribution of any population of organism. It includes both biotic and abiotic factors, and they are meant to restrict the productivity of organism, populations and communities. So they can restrict, and the productivity means growth and reproduction processes of organism, population, communities, and prevent them to achieve their full biological potential. So these are these factors act as hurdles and prevent living organisms to achieve their maximum biological potential. Limiting factor can be single or a group of elements. Ecological factors or eco-factors. So these are the factors which influences the living organism, and they can be broadly divided into two classes. One is biotic factor, other is abiotic factors. So environmental factors which influences living organisms are known as ecological factors or eco-factors. There are basically three types. Broadly we can divide it into two types, but in another way we can divide it into three types. So first comes the climatic factors, which include water, temperature, light, atmospheric gases and wind. Then second comes physiographic factors, so it includes altitude, effect of steepness and sunlight on vegetation. And third one comes biotic factors, which include interrelationship between different plants of a particular area. So we can divide again these factors into two broad categories, that is abiotic factors and biotic factors. Biotic factor means which include competition amongst the populations, organisms, and parasitism, predation, symbiosis. So interaction with other living organism by one living organism is it includes this biotic factor. Then next comes abiotic factor, which includes soil factors and climate factor. So these edaphic factors include soil type, structure, then soil pH, soil temperature, soil moisture, organic carbon and nitrogen content in the soil, heavy metal content in the soil. Climatic factors include temperature, sunlight, atmospheric pressure, humidity of air, radiation and ionization of air, then chemical composition of water and atmosphere. So these all factors influences the living organism, and these are considered as environmental factors or eco-factors. Next comes principles of limiting factors. So there are various laws which explain that environmental factors act as limiting factors. So organisms require essential materials which are necessary for their growth and reproduction. As we know that all these materials are fulfilled by environment. So organisms' response to environment is governed by various laws that we'll discuss one by one. First comes the law of minimum. So this law was proposed by Liebig in 1840. According to this law, the growth and reproduction of organisms are dependent on the factor that is present in minimum quantity in the environment. So any factor which is present in the minimum quantity is considered as the limiting factor according to this law, that is Liebig's law of minimum. A factor is limiting if its change in the environment produces change in the average equilibrium density. So any factor that can alter the equilibrium process in an environmental system, so that factor acts as a limiting factor. Next comes law of tolerance. So this law was proposed by Shelford. So it was proposed by Shelford in 1930. So this law states that for each abiotic factor, an organism has a range of tolerance within which it can survive. So it has a broad range of these factors that can be tolerated by living organism, and this range is known as range of tolerance. According to this law, organisms are exposed to a variety of environmental factors such as light, temperature, nutrients, etc. And each organism survive well only at particular range of the intensity of the factor, and this is called tolerance. So there is a minimum range or maximum range of environmental factor that can be tolerated by a living organism, and that range is known as the tolerance range. So every environmental factor has two zones, that is zone of tolerance and zone of intolerance. In zone of tolerance, organism can survive itself, and in the zone of intolerance, organism gets vanished or died. So firstly comes zone of tolerance. As the name indicate, in this zone, the tolerance in this zone of tolerance, organisms survive well. तो इसमें जो organism है वो survive करते हैं इस zone में. So zone of tolerance is further divided into different zones. The first comes optimum zone. As the name indicates, this is the most suitable zone where growth, reproduction and survival capacity is very high, and maximum number of organisms are found in this zone because all the environmental conditions are favorable. So that's why it contains maximum number of living organisms. Next comes critical minimum zone. As the name indicates, it is the lowest minimum limit below which growth and reproduction of organisms ceases, जिससे नीचे जो organism की growth है और development है वो रुक जाती है. So that environmental factor comes under this range, that is critical minimum zone. Next comes critical maximum zone. So it is the highest maximum limit above which growth and development of organisms ceases. So this is the upper limit above which organism stops its growth and development. So we'll understand this with the help of this diagram. So it includes two zones. The first one is the zone of tolerance. Then the second one, that is outside this zone of tolerance on both the sides, that is zone of intolerance. It includes the critical minimum zone and the critical maximum zone. जिस zone पे जो organisms हैं they are unable to survive, और इसमें जो organism हैं वो या तो extinct हो जाते हैं या उनकी growth रुक जाती है. The next, this zone, that is the stress zone, which is critical minimum zone, जहाँ पे organism खुद को survive करने के लिए extra effort डालता है. Then this range, that is the critical maximum zone, जहाँ पे maximum जो environmental factors हैं, suppose temperature अगर maximum हो जाता है, so maximum temperature that can be tolerated by living organism comes under this zone, that is called critical maximum zone. Then in between these zones, both these zones, that is critical minimum zone and critical maximum zone, there comes a zone which is known as optical tolerance range, जहाँ पे जो conditions होती हैं they are favorable, and we can notice the maximum growth number and survival rate of living organism, and this steep shows the number of organisms, that is population size. So maximum population size is found in this range, that is known as optimum tolerance range. Next, then comes stress zones or zone of intolerance. So the stress zone is found on either side of optimum range. तो optimum range के दोनों तरफ ही stress zones होती हैं, जिसमें जो activity है organism की that gets slowed down. In the zone of intolerance, that is also known as lethal zone. Lethal means that can cause death. The intensity of the environmental factor is either too low or very high. So ये जो conditions हैं intolerance zone में, यहाँ पे जो इंटेंसिटी होती है एनवायरमेंटल फैक्टर के कि वो बहुत कम भी हो सकती है या फिर बहुत ज़्यादा भी हो सकती है, जिसमें जो ऑर्गेनिज्म दे आर अनेबल टू सर्वाइव. When the species has a narrow range of tolerance, then we use one term, that is steno. So we use the prefix steno. For example, we have the organism which can tolerate only a narrow range of temperature, so we will use the term stenothermal. Means an organism that can tolerate a narrow range of temperature, means एक छोटी सी range of temperature को tolerate कर पाते हैं, so we can use this prefix, that is steno. When the species has very wide range of tolerance, then we use the prefix uri. So for example, the organisms which can tolerate a broad range of temperature, These organisms are termed as eurythermal organisms. The next important law which is related to this environmental factor is Blackman's law of limiting factor. So it was proposed by F. Blackman in 1905. It states that when a process is conditioned as to its rapidity or speed by a number of separate factors, the rate of process is limited by the pace of slowest factor. We will understand this with the help of this graph, which shows the rate of photosynthesis on y-axis and CO2 concentration on x-axis. It means there are various factors which control the process of photosynthesis, but the factor which is present at the lowest amount or in the lowest rate, so that will stop the process of photosynthesis, and that will act as a limiting factor. So he studied photosynthesis, which is controlled by 5 important factors, which include availability of water, quantity of carbon dioxide, light intensity, chlorophyll quantity, and temperature of chloroplast. So these are the factors which are responsible for the higher rate of photosynthesis, and it can also, any of these factors can limit the rate of photosynthesis. So if out of these 5 factors, any factor which is present at the lowest amount or lowest quantity, that can influence or lower the rate of photosynthesis and act as limiting factor. So deficiency in any of the factor can affect the rate of photosynthesis, and that becomes the limiting factor. Next comes ecological amplitude. So it is also known as ecological valence, and it also denotes the degree of adaptation of organism to its changing environment. So this is referred to the reaction of a species to individual environmental factor or to aggregate factors. So this is an adaptation shown by species for environmental factors. If the species are able to tolerate wide range of changes, then we use the prefix uri. If it can tolerate only a narrow range, then we will use the prefix steno. The species with broad ecological amplitude with respect to an aggregate factor are called eurybiont. So ऐसे organism जो broad range of environmental factors को tolerate कर पाते हैं and they show adaptations to these environmental factors, these are termed as eurybiont, while the species with narrow or low adaptability are called as stenobionts. So उसे use करते हैं हम term stenobiont. So stenotopic species have greater tendency to become extinct because they are unable to tolerate wide range of environmental factors. So इनके chances ज़्यादा होते हैं कि extinct हो जाए, while the eurytopic species can survive the adverse environmental conditions also. So stenobionts are very good bioindicator. So ये act करते हैं bioindicator. This is the graph which shows the range of different pine species or junipers to its different environmental conditions. So Douglas fir, that is found in the high temperature, then Pandorisa pine, then Pinon pine, and juniper species. So they have their decreasing moisture as well as elevation level. So the species shows different adaptation levels to different environmental conditions. Water is very important environmental factor that control and affects the life on Earth's surface. As we know that Earth is known as blue planet because it contains approximately 75% of water, and out of this 75% of water, 97% is the saline water or marine water, that is salt water, and the remaining 3% is fresh water. So it contains out of this 75% water on Earth's surface, 97% is present in oceans, that is the salt water, and remaining 3%, approximately 3% water, is the fresh water. And out of this 3% or approximately 2.5% fresh water, its 68.6% is in the frozen form, that is in the form of glaciers and ice caps, and remaining 30% is groundwater that is not available for the use, and some of this groundwater is used by plants. The next comes the surface water, that is approximately 1.3%. Out of this surface water, there is 73.1% water that is in the form of ice and snow, and 20% water is in the freshwater lakes, and then there are other water bodies, atmosphere, biological water, rivers, swamps, marshes, soil moisture. So this is the distribution of Earth's water. So this water is a limiting factor, and it is a limited also, and the fresh water is very much limited. That's why there is one saying that the Third World War will be for the water. So Earth's surface has 75% water, and out of this 75%, 97% is salt water and 3% is fresh water only. And this 2/3 of this fresh water is again frozen, that is not available for the use, and 1% remaining of all Earth's water mainly found as groundwater, making it limited natural resource. This is very much limited natural resource. Next comes importance of water. Why water is important? As we know that our body cells contain approximately 80 to 90% of water. So living cells are composed of 7 to 95% of water, and it makes 80 to 90% of fresh weight of most of the herbaceous plants and 50% of the woody plants. So we talk about is fresh weight. So जो herbaceous plants होते हैं उनका 80 to 90% water weight जो होता है fresh weight, that is because of water, and in case of woody plant it is approximately 50% of the total weight. And the water is a universal solvent and is important reactant in hydrolysis reactions like hydrolysis of starch into sugar. So this breakdown of starch by various enzymatic reactions into sugars is also involves the water molecule. And water maintains turgidity of the cells, so that's why the plant have different shape for maintaining the form of herbaceous plants. And turgor is important for opening and closing of stomata, that involves gases exchange. So this is a very important event that is also done with the help of water. Then hydration of protoplasm, mobility of gametes, dehiscence of fruits. These are various important events which occur in plants because of water. So this is water cycle. So the water from oceans or water bodies evaporates into the atmosphere. Then in an atmosphere, these droplets gets condensed and gets precipitated down into the form various forms of water, that is in the form of rainwater, then snow, hail, and which is on the surface again. So we'll discuss this in upcoming slides in detail. Then plants. How do plants use water, and what are the various importance of water in plants? Plant need water for collection of nutrients from the soil. As we know that जो भी nutrients हैं वो soil से water की help से ही plant के अंदर आते हैं, and plant need water to transport the nutrients into different parts because they don't have any connective tissue like blood. So जो ये सारा का सारा काम है, it is done by the water. Without water, plants cannot absorb the nutrients from the soil. Water also plays an important role of cooling the plants in extreme heat. In addition to this, the definite shape of the plant parts, like we have petals, leaves, these are also maintained by water due to turgor pressure. Next, types of plants and animals on the basis of water requirement. We can classify plants and animals according to their need of water. So first comes hydrophytes, and then indicate the plants living in water bodies. Then xerophytes, plants which can tolerate extremely dry conditions. Then mesophytes, plants require moderate quantity of water. Hydrocoels, so this is the term used for aquatic animals. Xerocoel, these are the terrestrial animals which can tolerate extremely dry conditions. Mesocoels, these are the terrestrial animals that requires moderate quantity of water. Then next, the important law, that is Skimper's third law. This law states that the amount of seasonal distribution of rainfall and humidity of air determine the type of vegetation in tropical and temperate zone. So this law says that जो seasonal variations हैं, distribution है rainfall का और humidity का, that determines the vegetation in tropical regions and temperate regions. Next, precipitation. So as the name indicates, precipitation is condensation of these water vapors in the form of water droplets that reaches the Earth's surface. This process is known as precipitation. So all forms of moisture originating from clouds and falling to the ground is known as precipitation. It includes all forms of water that reaches the Earth's surface from atmosphere, usually falling as rain, snow, sleet, and hail. Next comes causes of precipitation. So there are various factors which are involved in precipitation. Atmosphere must have sufficient moisture. This is the first requirement. There must be sufficient nuclei. Nuclei means there may be some salt particles, product of combustions, dust particles that act as a nucleus around which the water vapors gets condensed. So in the atmosphere, air condensation. Weather condition must be favorable for condensation of water vapors, and the product of condensation must reach the Earth's surface. Precipitation occurs when these water droplets come together and condense, forming larger drops of water that can drop down. As precipitation occurs, a considerable part of it is evaporated back to the atmosphere to complete the water cycle. Net precipitation at a place and its form depend on number of meteorological factors such as temperature, humidity, wind, pressure in the region enclosing the clouds and ground surface, etc. So there are various factors which governs the rate of precipitation in any place, which include temperature, humidity, wind, pressure, and so these are the factors which are responsible for precipitation of the water vapors. Next, we have different forms of precipitation. Firstly comes rain. So rain is any liquid that drops from the clouds in the sky. And rain is described as water droplets of 0.5 millimeter or larger. This is the dimension of rain droplets. Droplets less than half a millimeter are defined as drizzle. So that is known as drizzle. Raindrops frequently fall when small cloud particles strikes and bind together, creating bigger drops. As this process continues, the drop gets bigger and bigger to an extent where they become too heavy to suspend on the air and they drops down to the Earth's surface. As a result, the gravity pulls them down to the Earth. So the rain is form of precipitation where the droplet size is 0.5 millimeter or larger. Then we call it as rain. If its size is less than half a millimeter, then we call it as drizzle. The next form of precipitation is snow. It occurs when the temperature is less than freezing point. So snow is an aggregate of ice crystals that forms into flake. Snow forms at temperature below freezing. तो temperature freezing point से नीचे होना चाहिए तभी snowfall होता है. The entire temperature profile in troposphere needs to be at or below freezing for snow to reach the Earth's surface. The intensity of snow is determined by the accumulation of snow over a given time. So कितना snowfall हुआ है, that is determined by the accumulation of snow over a given time. So the snow may be light, moderate, and heavy. These are the three terms that we can use for snowfall. Next form of precipitation is snow pellets. So precipitation that grows by supercooled water accreting of ice crystals or snowflakes. So जो precipitation है that grows from supercooled water. Supercooled water is water जो freeze नहीं होता है below 0 degree temperature. That water is known as supercooled water. But after some time it gets frozen down and forms ice crystal. These ice crystals are known as snowflakes. Snow pellets can also occur when a snowflake melts about halfway, then refreezes at its falls. जो snow pellets हैं वो बनते हैं तब जब snowflake melt करते हैं about halfway, then refreeze at its fall. Snow pellets have characteristics of hail, sleet and snow. So इसमें जो features होते हैं वो होते हैं other form of precipitation के like we have hail, sleet or snow. Next comes snow grains. So snow grains are small grains of ice. They do not produce much accumulation and are the solid equivalent to drizzle. तो ये जो snow grains होते हैं they are smaller in size और इनका जो size होता है that is very small and we can say that these are the solid equivalents to drizzle. जो drizzle होता है बूंदाबांदियाँ होती है उसके equivalent size के छोटे grains होते हैं snow. Next comes ice crystals. So they are small ice crystals that flow with the wind and are also called diamond dust. So the term used for this these ice crystals is diamond dust. Next form of precipitation is hail. So hail is a precipitation during the summer season. जब summer season होता है तब जो precipitation होती है in the form of solid ice ball is known as hail in the form of small ice pieces that is at least 5 millimeter in diameter, that is equivalent to the diameter of a raindrop. So it forms due to ice crystal and super cool water that freezes. So as a result of this combination, the hail is formed. And soft hail is whiter and less dense since it has air bubbles, while the hard hail may cause some serious injuries, especially to the young crops. जो hard hails होते हैं, ओले गिरते हैं, they can cause serious injuries to the young crops as well as to the animals also. Their size can be very huge. That can cause serious damages to the crops as well as for the living organisms and animals. Next comes form of water is graupel. Graupel forms in the same way as hail, except the diameter is less than 5 millimeter. So जो graupels होते हैं, they are smaller in size as compared to the hail. Next comes drizzle. So drizzle is liquid precipitation that reaches the Earth's surface in the form of small droplets that are less than 0.5 millimeter in diameter. So this is a dimension. They are the small fine raindrops which have a diameter less than 0.5 millimeter, and the term used for these water droplet is drizzle. Next form of precipitation is freezing drizzle. As the name indicates, the freezing drizzle is liquid precipitation that reaches the Earth's surface in the form of drops that are less than 0.5 millimeter in diameter, and they get frozen down when they reaches the Earth's surface. The drops then freezes on the Earth's surface. ये जो drops हैं ये freeze होती हैं Earth के surface के ऊपर. Next form of precipitation is freezing rain. Freezing rain is liquid precipitation that reaches the Earth's surface, and the size of drops are greater than 0.5 millimeter. So जो size होता है drops का वो drizzle के size से बड़ा होता है. The drops then freezes on the Earth's surface. ये भी जो drops हैं Earth's surface पे freeze होती हैं. So freezing rain is frozen precipitation, melts in warm air. The rain falls and freezes on the cold surface. जैसे Earth's surface पे पहुंचते वैसे ही फिर से ये freeze होते हैं. Next comes freezing fog. So freezing fog is a fog composed of super cool water drops. Super cool water drops. Super cool water means जो 0 degree से नीचे भी freeze नहीं होता है water, that is on a super cool water. These drops freeze just after they wet the Earth's surface. Next comes mixed precipitation. So as the name indicates, it's the combination of two or more winter precipitation types occurring at the same time over a period of time at a same place. So जब जो precipitations हैं, like we have rainwater, ice crystals or hails, they come simultaneously at the same time at the same place, then we call it as mixed precipitation. The last topic is hydrological cycle. This is also known as hydrologic cycle or water cycle. It describes the continuous movement of water on, above and below the surface of Earth. Here water changes to its different states, like by the process of evaporation, melting and freezing, to sublimation, condensation and deposition. And all these processes require the application of energy. So this is also known as water cycle, this hydrological cycle. And it involves the process by which water moves around the Earth to different places. So जो water की movement है Earth में in different places is by this process, that is hydrological cycle. It involves some continuous processes like we have evaporation, precipitation and runoff. Water can become runoff when we will use this term when it flows along the surface into lakes, rivers and stream. So जब पानी surface के ऊपर move करता है and it finally enters into the streams or river or oceans, so that water is finally known, that water is known as runoff water and can be absorbed and become groundwater. And this water can be absorbed by the soil by the process of infiltration, that is known as infiltration, जिसमें जो water है वो percolate कर जाता है soil के surface के अंदर and usually collected in the aquifers, so it becomes groundwater, and this becomes groundwater. Next comes components of hydrological cycle. So it involves various processes. The first one comes runoff water. So water flowing over the land, making its way towards rivers, lakes, and ocean is known as runoff water. And then second process, that is very important process, which is known as precipitation. So the fall of moisture from atmosphere to the earth surface. जब पानी एटमॉस्फेयर से अर्थ के सरफेस के ऊपर गिरता है, this process involves the precipitation in any forms, that is rain, hail, snow, drizzle, snowflakes, graupels, etc. So all these forms come under this process, that is precipitation, by which this water reaches the earth's surface from atmosphere. The next process is evaporation. It is the conversion of natural liquids, especially water, into gaseous form or water vapors. This process is known as evaporation. So this is a very important step. So जो भी water है अर्थ के ऊपर वो evaporate होता है and reaches the atmosphere in the form of vapors. There is another process which is known as transpiration. The next is sublimation. This process is the direct conversion of solid into gaseous form. So ice is directly converted into vapors. Sublimation occurs when snow or ice changes directly into water vapors without becoming water. So that process is known as sublimation. It usually occurs as a result of dry winds and low humidity. So ये जो conditions हैं ये चाहिए इसके लिए to ensure this process of sublimation, that is dry winds and low humidity. Sublimation can be observed on mountain peaks where the air pressure is quite low. तो माउंटेन पीक्स पे हम इस प्रोसेस को देख सकते हैं. एंड दिस प्रोसेस इज नॉन एज सब्लिमेशन. जब आइस से डायरेक्टली वाटर वेपर्स बनते हैं फ्रॉम सॉलिड टू गैशियस स्टेट, दैट इज नॉन एज सब्लिमेशन. So the low air pressure helps to sublimate the snow into water vapors as less energy is utilized in this process. So इस process में बहुत कम energy लगती है when this ice is directly converted into water vapors. Next step is condensation. It is the conversion of water vapors or gas into liquid. तो जो एटमॉस्फेयर है वहाँ पे जो डस्ट पार्टिकल्स हैं या न्यूक्लियाई, हमने ये टर्म यूज़ की थी. सो इसके चारों तरफ जो वाटर वेपर्स हैं दे गेट्स कंडेंस्ड व्हेन टेम्परेचर गोज डाउन, जब टेम्परेचर कम होता है एंड बिकम्स अ ड्रॉप ऑफ वाटर. So transpiration, the next this is evaporation that is taking place from any aerial part of the plant, that is known as transpiration. So it is loss of water from the aerial part of the plant in the form of water vapors. So water droplets on the leaf getting evaporated into atmosphere. So this process is also important for water cycle. Next is infiltration. So it is a process of filtration of water to the inner layers of soil. Because this process involves the structure and texture or nature of the soil particles. Larger is the size of soil particle, greater with the rate of infiltration. So this is the entry of water into the soil, and this water becomes the groundwater. Larger the size of particles, greater is the rate of infiltration, while it is inversely proportional to the runoff. Means जितना ज़्यादा infiltration होगा उतना ही कम runoff होगा. So these both terms are inversely related. So this is how this water cycle gets completed. This was all about for our today's discussion about the ecological factor water. Hope you will get some idea from this presentation. If you have any questions, queries, and any suggestions, you can give it in comment section. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.